Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have Dr. Arokia Antonysam. She is a mental health expert and she is the CEO and co-founder of Mind Connect. She spends a lot of her time focused on innovative approaches so that we can all show up with our full self and with authenticity and with confidence. So I'm looking forward to getting to know her journey. Dr. Ayoka, welcome to Living with Purpose.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Batsha. Pleased to be here. And it's a privilege to be part of your podcast.
My pleasure. So let's talk a little bit about your growing up, your childhood, where you grew up. What were some of the important moments in your family life that shaped your journey?
Well, I grew up in a very simple, humble household, one of 7 children. Our home was full of love, laughter, chaos, arguments, discussions. And I often used to joke with my friends that my home was like a mini nursery. From the day I was born, I think what I noticed is this, and the environment, my home environment, what it gave me was, I would say, without even me realizing at the time, I think I learned emotional intelligence. Probably that was happening subconsciously, I would say, Dr. Bacha. Because in a house of 7 children, I'm exactly in the middle. I've got 3 siblings older than me and 3 siblings younger than me. My mom used to say, and I've heard my dad say this as well, that I'm very good at negotiating. I think
Yeah,
maybe just, being exactly the middle child,
right.
probably I've learned this art of, negotiating. I've learned to be patient. I've learned to lead as well. And I think, probably in that household, making yourself, being heard. Because, among 7 children, if you want to make your needs known, yeah, you need to be, a bit
Right.
loud. You need to,
Yes.
yes. So that's my upbringing, I would say. And both my parents, they worked full time. My dad, he had to work abroad for, quite some time because both my parents, they wanted us to go to private schools. So if you have to meet the needs of,
Mm.
7 children, our, schooling needs, then obviously, my dad decided to go abroad. My mom was working full time. So essentially, she was more like a single mom, full time working. So you can imagine, although she had, help with, say, domestic chores in terms of that emotional labor and, looking after kids and, showering love and discipline, I would say it was, her main role.
And
So,
then you grew up in South India, correct?
yes, yes.
And what were your parents working in? What were they doing?
So my dad, he was working in the welding industry. So, he spent most of his time abroad. And then, when he returned to India, like, we were more like, I would say I was more in past my GCSE, close to A levels. So that's
Mm.
when my dad returned. And then, yeah, I mean, he loves agriculture. So he invested a lot in farming. Yeah. So I would say in this household, I mean, what I learned from my mom was strength, that courage, that persistence. And from my dad, I would say it was more of resilience. That's what I learned from him, resilience and, perseverance. And obviously, he had an amazing sense of humor. He can relate to any kind of, I mean, age groups, any group for that matter. And, he's always the icebreaker. So when I finished school, I entered medicine in one of the local colleges in India. And when I was studying medicine, more than my interest in hearts and lungs and kidneys and all that, I was more fascinated with how the mind works because this is something that is least understood and the most powerful and very intricate. I used to wonder, like, even when two people are handling the same situation, I used to wonder why do they handle it, so differently? The situation is the same. So I used to wonder what makes
Yeah,
them
yeah.
handle this, very differently. So for me, psychiatry was definitely not an option. It was a calling, I would say. So after I finished medicine, I served for a couple of years in a rural town in India, in a rural village, I would say. These 2 years, it just, I had to leave theory aside. And this is where I learned more of empathy, compassion, stigma, discrimination, where people were suffering, and it's got nothing to do with biology. It's got to do with poverty, social inequality, and illiteracy. I would say these 2 years not only changed me, I would say they shaped me, they transformed me. And then after that, I moved to the UK. So imagine, I mean, with that mindset, I come to the UK, I trained in psychiatry. It was good. The training here was quite rigorous and structured. After I completed my psychiatry training, as much as I was interested, in the clinical aspects of psychiatry, I was also developing a growing interest in leadership. I've always been interested in leading. And that was not because of the status or the title or the award. I don't think that was the reason. It was more of the need to protect, the need to advocate. And I used to do this in school as well, standing up for others, who can't stand up for themselves. So that was there. And interestingly, as I finished my clinical training, my interest in leadership started to grow. I was able to complete a master's in leadership and public health at Manchester Business School. And then once I finished that, I started working as a consultant psychiatrist in the UK.
So you went into this rural space. You must have been quite young.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. There was only one bus which I have to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and, really rush. And I have to take that one bus that goes to that village. If I miss it, that's it. I'll have to wait for the next day because there's only one bus which goes there in the morning. It returns, once in the evening. That's it. There was only one trip. It was a very, very remote area.
That's fascinating because that becomes a shaper, right? I mean, when you think about it, that kind of work for multiple years. So talk a little bit about how was that so you're still living in, I'm assuming, one of the major cities
in London?
No, in India, right? Before you moved here.
Oh, yeah.
And you are staying at home, traveling to this village every day to do your work. You're coming back and trying to relate back to an urban environment with your friends, etc. How was that? Because it must be hard because on one side you're kind of going and looking at something very different and then you're coming back into an urban environment.
I would say those years anchored me. Those were the years I would say maybe I learned the most. It wasn't even like I go there on a daily basis. So when I say there's only one bus, so I had to stay in a nearby village.
Right.
Because this was quite far off home. So I was nowhere close to home. So I had to stay in a nearby village. And from that village, I had to take the bus to go to this, village where I was serving, the population there. I used to come home probably, maybe once in 6 months or something like that to visit my parents and, friends. As much as it was very different, I mean, looking back, because, facilities were very, very limited. But still, I don't know, for some reason, I mean, the scarcity is not something that is stuck with me. It's the people, what they were missing out and what they were struggling with and what they were deprived of. I think that's what stuck with me. It's not what I missed out. It's not what I missed out. And it's a bit strange. I used to ask myself, why is that the case? But yeah, just going back to, what you asked, it's what I witnessed, what I experienced, what I saw in the people out there. That's what stuck with me the most.
Well, that's thank you very much for that clarification. So here you are now in London, you're practicing. So talk about your work today. What is it focused on and what has been the changes that you've seen through your work?
So here as a psychiatrist, after I finished my training, I started as a consultant psychiatrist. And then in 6 months' time, because I also trained in leadership, I was able to get into director positions in NHS. So it was more of a dual role. So I was working as a clinician, as a consultant psychiatrist, as well as a director at the same time. And this dual role sat comfortably with me because it also kept me grounded. The more and more I'm able to see patients, the more and more I was able to advocate for them in my leadership position. But I also noticed something, interestingly, as a consultant psychiatrist, I was comfortable, I was able to do my role. We had, say, clinical challenges, and then there were maybe, case discussions where you were able to, talk about different perspectives. And, that was absolutely fine. But then on the leadership front, I could see probably a gap, maybe the gender gap or something didn't kind of, resonate very well. And I could see the difference. I didn't feel the difference as a clinician, as a consultant, but then as a leader, I could see something didn't seem right. And I had to maybe, work twice as hard to be seen, to be heard. That seemed a little bit of a struggle, climbing up the leadership ladder. It wasn't easy.
And how many years have you been doing this work?
I've been a consultant psychiatrist for nearly 16 years now, roughly the same number of years, as a director as well.
Talk a little bit about, so where are your siblings? You're the middle, you're in the UK. Where, I mean, are they all spread out? Are they doing different things?
Probably my mom's manifestation when we were all young was they had to be distributed, all around the world. She'd always used to, my
Yeah,
mom, she has very strong religious faith.
yeah,
And for her prayers were always like, my kids need to be, well educated and, move to different parts of the world because education was non-negotiable in my household.
right, right.
And it was, and both my parents, I mean, they wanted us, they sent us to the best schools, not for the prestige or, status. For them, education meant freedom. And
Yeah,
that was the
yeah. I mean,
reason.
which
Yeah,
which is what is true for just about all of us, right? Parents
absolutely.
who are basically looking at it and saying the more the kids get educated, it is freedom for them and it is freedom for the kids.
Absolutely. As my mom manifested, we all ended up in different continents. I came here, one of my brothers moved to Norway, and then my other brother moved to Australia. My sister moved to the US, and then another brother, he moved to US as well. And then my another sister, she moved to Tanzania. So literally all of us were dispersed, and it was just my mom and dad back home.
And what fields are they in?
They're all in different fields. So I'm the only doctor, and my brothers, one of them went into real estate. My oldest, he was into business. And my another brother, he went into software. The other one went into training and then, ended up in software. My sister into research scientist. She did microbiology and immunology. My younger sister went into rehab. So, yeah, completely different fields.
Well, it is actually quite amazing to see people growing up in the exact same environment move into so many different fields and then decide that the world is their oyster and therefore they can actually go. Anyway, I mean, mostly people coming out of India, US, UK, yeah, maybe Australia, but then, anywhere else is not really something that people consider. So that's very gratifying to see. And I am assuming your parents are extremely satisfied and proud with what all of you are doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. My dad, my late dad, my dad died a couple of years ago. He was unwell, and my mom, she's 87. She's doing well. She's just, keeping up her positivity and optimism.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about Mind Connect. What are you doing now? What does Mind Connect do? And just give one or two examples so that our listeners can understand why what you do is so important for our well-being.
So, Mind Connect is a digital mental health platform. And the reason I wanted to do Mind Connect, I mean, how did I end up here? So, my last role as a divisional medical director for Signet Healthcare, that's the largest independent healthcare provider in the UK. I really enjoyed my job. Definitely on paper and on bank balance, I would say it was a huge success. I liked it. The job gave me the flexibility. I did travel a lot. I enjoyed my team, everything you could ask for. Like that
Hmm.
was my dream job. And I was so happy to be, where I was. And then at some point, I started, feeling an itch, kind of a gap. And then I thought, okay, an opportunity came up for me to do my executive MBA at Warwick Business School. So I thought, okay, let me do that. So I enrolled for that program. I completed it in a couple of years. And I still felt that, kind of that gap or, something, unfulfilling in you. And then I decided, I was just, sat reflecting and looking back at the something, missing. Why am I not? It's not like I was not happy or, not contented or not satisfied. I had it all, but still I could sense, a gap in me. that's when I decided, my purpose when I was serving those 2 years in that rural village was to serve, the wider society. I was asking myself, if I'm sat here thinking, about how to serve them, I need to do something about it. So that's when Mind Connect was born. Especially, with technology, I felt when I was doing my
Mm.
AI module at Michigan, I thought, I've got the answer now. Why can't I look at developing a global mental health platform? It doesn't matter where I am. Why can't I do that? That's how I started Mind Connect. So end of August, I left my job. I resigned. So the last 6 months, I've not been drawing a salary. Interestingly, the last 6 months, I felt so happy, so peaceful, and so aligned because although building this tool, is taking its own time, and I think, it is needed. Although AI can give you all the answers, you need to make sure the tool you're developing is safe, it is ethical, and it has got good governance in its structure. So what is happening now is, Dr. Badsha, for someone to see a psychiatrist in the UK, it takes about 6 months to 18 months, even couple of years, depending on where you are and your affordability. If you can afford, yes, you can go for private care.
Mm.
But NHS care is pretty good, so people do wait to be, seen in the NHS. But the waiting list is huge. So by the time you see someone in clinic, they have deteriorated to such a degree that they would have been dropped out from their university or left their job or left the family. So the damage is already done. So this tool, what we are developing, is an assessment tool. It is moving parts of that assessment that usually takes place in a psychiatric consultation room, removing that from that room to the comfort of the patient's own home. It is done safely and ethically. So by doing that, my purpose is complete because I want to empower my patient. When my patient goes and sits there in a clinical consultation, he or she is well equipped with the knowledge about their condition. So they go there with questions for the consultant. I think that's how it has to be. Not to be in a vulnerable victim position. Rather, you are a user expert. Just because you have mental illness doesn't mean that you are in any way disadvantaged from someone who could be normal or does not have a mental illness. So that's the position this tool elevates them to, and that's what it does.
That's fantastic. And what has the response been? Are people using it? You're still developing it?
We are still, because we will be at some point, we will be introducing AI into this tool. So every stage we are testing it, and we are doing it very, very carefully, looking at safety, ethics, governance, at every stage, because we have to do this frequent, user testing. It is taking its course. So I would say it's almost kind of 75% complete by now.
Great. So talking about purpose, and since you have brought it up, talk a little bit about why you see, especially from your vantage point, right? Purpose is all about in your mind, right? It's not a physical activity. It is actually how you shape your mind to show up. So talk as to why you see purpose being an important thing for everyone to have.
For me, there have been, I would say, moments in my career, in my entrepreneurship journey, when walking away would have been a much easier choice. Resistance, governance battles, scrutiny, criticism, and even isolation at the top. I've experienced all this, and I continue to experience this as a founder as well. Although everything is, within your, say, your control or your power or your influence, you're still, you do tend to experience all this. And I tend to, as a consultant psychiatrist, I've been in situations where, our decisions matters livelihoods. We absorb, as a leader, you absorb the tension of the whole team so that, they don't fracture. You hold vision when, they are in doubt. And in those moments, this is what I've learned. Ego is not enough. Your ambition is not enough. Your recognition is not enough. What life has taught me is purpose. Once you have a clear purpose, that has helped me, especially. I think that has helped me to overcome all these battles. And for me, my purpose is very simple. Something I've seen in patients, when I see patients in clinic, I do not see the risks in them. I see their strengths. And I tend to shine a light, a torch on their strengths. So by reinforcing their strengths and, by repeating that again and again, that itself, tends them to or helps them to recover faster. That doesn't mean that, I'm ignoring the risks. I do, acknowledge and, discuss the risks with them, but my main focus will be on the strengths. Interestingly, as a leader, so here you're seeing a patient, with risks and strengths, and people are shining a torch, on the risk, but I'm shining a torch on their strengths, and I'm seeing their strengths to help them recover. But as a leader, everybody are seeing the strengths, but there are leaders who do have a dark side as well. I like to shine a light on the dark side, not to shame them or blame them or anything. No, actually, when one understands the dark side, when you acknowledge it, when you address it, you transform. You use the dark side to your strength. And that's what I've seen. So that is my purpose, is to shine a light on the strength when it needs to, especially when it comes to my patients. When it comes to my senior leaders, my colleagues, probably shine the same light, on the dark side. Doing it, not like kind of, publicly, but more privately, more confidentially, making them aware so that, they will be able to address it.
I so much like the whole focus on strengths, because that's really one of my first principles in my book, Purpose Mindset, is work with your strengths. And that's really what helps you get to where you need to go. So as we come to our end of our time, share your one golden nugget, a piece of wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners.
So for me, if I have to leave one golden nugget for the audience out there, I would say your darkness is not your enemy. It is your untrained power. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. As I said, I work with patients in crisis units, I work with leaders, different environments, but the psychology is the same. Unexamined fear, whether it is the patient or a leader, when that fear is unexamined, that becomes aggression. Feelings of insecurity, again, whether it is a leader or a patient, in a patient that becomes, control, and that's when they can become a bit, aggressive, loud, and, may cause harm either to themselves or others. The same thing, if you translate that to leaders, unprocessed insecurity, it becomes, control. Pain, both can experience pain. When our patients experience pain, they withdraw into depression, anxiety. Likely, when leaders, when they experience pain, they can also get hooked to addiction, anxiety, isolation. It happens. So I think here what I'm seeing is I'm seeing a pattern as a psychiatrist and as a leader dealing with two different populations. What I'm seeing is a pattern that most people spend their lives suppressing that part of themselves. The real work that needs to happen here is integration. And that's the work I do in psychiatry. That's what I do in leadership. That's what I do as a coach. And that's what I do with my own life. So my golden nugget is simple. Don't hide parts of yourself that feel uncomfortable. You need to name it to tame it.
That's such a great way to end, right? Harness your fear. That really unleashes your strengths and it allows you to overcome resistance and barriers. Aroki, thank you so very much for being part of this podcast. Again, to our listeners, purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Articulate your strengths, work with your strengths, embrace fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Basha. Thanks for having me.